The first voice I heard wasn't my husband's. It was my aunt's, low and deliberate, the way she used to talk when she was counting money. She won't make it past the weekend. A pause. And frankly, the longer we wait, the messier this gets. I couldn't open my eyes. I couldn't turn my head. The machine beside me was breathing for me in a rhythm I hadn't chosen, a slow mechanical push and pull, like the ocean deciding whether to keep something washed up on shore. My fingers were flat against the mattress. I tried to curl them. Nothing. I was awake. I was completely, terrifyingly awake. And the woman who had attended my wedding, who had cried real tears when my father walked me down the aisle, was standing at the foot of my hospital bed deciding when I would die. Welcome back to Dark Road Revenge, where the people closest to you sometimes turn out to be the strangest strangers of all. If you're new here, hit subscribe, because what you're about to hear took me 2 years to be able to say out loud. This is my story. Every word of it is true. My name is Serena Calloway. I'm 31 years old. I teach 3rd grade at an elementary school in a small town in Ohio, where everybody knows your car and your business and the name of your dog. My father, Robert Calloway, died when I was 24. Pancreatic cancer, the kind that doesn't give you much time to argue with it. He was gone in 8 months from diagnosis to burial. I wasn't ready. Nobody ever is. What my father left behind, besides a half-finished woodworking shop in the garage and a subscription to a fishing magazine that kept arriving for 2 years after he died, was a trust. My mother, Clara, had died in a car accident when I was 11. Her life insurance, $2.4 million, had been sitting in a managed trust for 20 years, growing quietly the way money does when it has nothing to spend itself on. My father explained it to me the week before he went into hospice. He was sitting in his recliner with the footrest up, wearing the gray cardigan he wore every single day that last winter, and he said, "Serena, this money is your mother's money. I never touched it. I never felt right touching it. It releases on your 31st birthday. Not a day before." I asked him what happened if I died before 31. He looked at me with that particular tiredness of a man who has already thought about everything that could go wrong. "It goes to the estate," he said. "And the estate goes to the next of kin." Next of kin, after me, was my father's sister, my Aunt Miriam. Miriam Calloway Petch was 63 years old, twice divorced, and possessed of a very precise understanding of where money was and who was standing between her and it. She had a laugh that filled a room and a habit of touching your arm when she talked to you, like she was taking your pulse. I want to be honest about this. Miriam was not always the villain of this story. When my mother died, it was Miriam who drove 4 hours to stay with us, who made my father eat, who braided my hair for school because my father's hands were too unsteady in those first months. I wore her old costume jewelry to my 6th grade graduation because she said every girl needed something that sparkled. She was the closest thing to a mother I had for years. That's the thing about betrayal that nobody prepares you for. It doesn't arrive wearing a black hat. It arrives wearing a gray cardigan and a familiar perfume. Miriam always wore something cedar and rose, the kind that lingers on upholstered furniture, and it sits across from you at Thanksgiving and asks if you want more stuffing. I had trusted Miriam with my healthcare power of attorney since I was 22. My father had suggested it. "She's family," he said. "She'll do right by you." I signed the papers without reading them carefully, the way young people sign things they can't imagine ever needing. I should have read them. The accident happened on a Thursday. That morning, I was sitting at my kitchen table grading spelling tests. My husband, Daniel, had already left for work. He manages a hardware distribution warehouse, 20 minutes east of town, the kind of job that starts at 6 and ends when it ends. Our cat, a fat gray tabby named Biscuit, was sitting on the stack of ungraded papers refusing to move. Miriam called at 8:15. She sounded warm. She sounded like the Miriam who braided my hair. "Serena, honey, I'm up at the lake house this week. The gutters are absolutely destroyed, and I can't get anyone out here until next month. Would you be a sweetheart and come take a look? I've got that potato soup you love on the stove already." I should tell you about the lake house. My father bought it the year before he got sick, a small A-frame on the north end of Carver Lake, about 40 minutes up a county road that wound through the hills like someone had drawn it with their eyes closed. He'd always meant to fix the place up. He never got to. After he died, Miriam had taken it over, started staying there summers, claimed it was better for her blood pressure. I said yes. I nearly always said yes to Miriam. Old habits. Daniel called as I was backing out of the driveway. "You want me to come?" he asked. I told him no, it was just gutters. I'd be back by dinner. "Call me when you get there," he said. "I always do," I said. I didn't get there. The brakes gave out at mile marker 17. On a curve, where the road drops sharply to the left, and there's nothing between the shoulder and a 30-foot embankment. But a guardrail that someone had hit before you could see the old dent, painted rust orange where the metal had scraped. The pedal went soft, then it went completely. The wheel shook. I remember the guardrail coming toward me and thinking, very clearly and very stupidly, I didn't feed Biscuit this morning. Then white. Then nothing. Then the machine breathing for me. The ICU at Millhaven Regional smelled like antiseptic and heating duct dust and, very faintly, the hand lotion of whoever had last been in my room. Cucumber something. Not unpleasant. Just wrong for the situation. I woke up, if that's even the word, somewhere in the first 24 hours. Not awake the way you wake up from sleep. Awake the way a circuit trips back on, sudden and incomplete. I couldn't open my eyes. I couldn't feel my legs. I could hear the ventilator, and I could feel the tape on my left hand where the IV went in, and I could feel the weight of the sheets, heavy and starched, across my chest. And I could hear Miriam. She was talking to someone, a nurse, maybe, or a doctor in the hallway just outside my door, which was open by about 6 inches. I learned the geography of that room entirely through sound in those first hours. The door hinges squeaked at 30 degrees. The floor outside was different linoleum than the floor inside, harder, slightly different resonance under shoes. Miriam wore low heels that day. Click, pause, click. She doesn't have much brain activity, Miriam was saying. The neurologist was very honest with us. It's a matter of time. Pausa. I have the healthcare directive here. I just want to make sure we're all clear on the process. I remember the way my body tried to react to the surge, the scream building behind ribs that wouldn't move, and how nothing happened. Complete internal riot. Complete external stillness. My hands stayed flat. My face stayed slack. I was a locked room that everyone thought was empty. The next morning, Miriam came with my cousin Petra. Petra was Miriam's daughter from her first marriage, 34, lean, with her mother's habit of touching people when she talked. She'd always been kind to me growing up. Awkward, but kind. She'd sent me a beautiful handmade card when Daniel and I got married. I used to think of her as more sister than cousin. I heard them come in together. Miriam sat in the chair to my left. It was vinyl, and it made a specific sound when she settled into it, a soft compression, like a sigh. Petra stood near the window. I could tell by the angle of her voice and the occasional thin scrape of her sneaker sole when she shifted her weight. They were quiet for a while. Then Miriam opened something, a folder, by the sound of it. Thick paper sliding against thick paper, and said, very quietly, "Her birthday is in 9 days." Petra's sneaker scraped. 9 days, Miriam said again. "And right now today, if she passes, the trust reverts to Robert's estate, which comes to me." A long pause. "But if she turns 31, she gets it all," Petra finished. 3.8 million, Miriam said. $3.8 million that your uncle never spent, that's been sitting there for 20 years, goes to a third-grade teacher in Ohio. While I've been the one managing this family, handling the estate, paying the property taxes on that lake house out of my own pocket. I lay there and I felt the room rearrange itself. I had known about the trust the way you know about a dentist appointment 6 months away, abstractly, distantly, as a fact that belonged to the future and not the present. I had never calculated it against my own death. I had never needed to. But Miriam had. She had known about that reversion clause for years, maybe since before my father died. And she had spent 9 years watching me get older, watching the date approach, watching the number grow. And now I was 30 days from 31, and I was in a hospital bed, and she had my healthcare power of attorney. The folder closed. The clasp clicked. Miriam set it on the tray table beside my bed, and I felt the weight of it there, 3 inches from my hand, like a sentence someone had already written. Here is what it is like to be trapped inside yourself. There is no panic after the first hours. Panic requires movement, some outlet for the energy of it. What comes instead is a cold, clarifying stillness. Your brain, cut off from every action it wants to take, turns inward and starts cataloging. You notice things you wouldn't notice if you could move. The sound of the ventilator is not one sound, it's three. A hiss and a push and a soft click at the release. The night shift nurse has a different walk than the day shift nurse. Miriam always touches her phone before she speaks, a small tap 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 on the glass that I learned to dread because it meant she was about to say something important. I cataloged Miriam's schedule. She arrived between 8 and 9 in the morning. She left for lunch around noon. I could smell the cafeteria on her breath when she came back. Always something with onion. She stayed until 6 or 7, and sometimes she came back late, after 9, when the floor was quiet. Those late visits were the worst. That was when she talked to Petra about the court order. I heard it on the third night, past visiting hours, but Miriam had used the healthcare directive to get extended access. They came in together, and they whispered, not for my benefit, I think, but from the instinct that comes when you're planning something you know is wrong. Your voice drops without your permission. Reinhardt says we can file for compassionate withdrawal, Miriam said. Emergency petition. A judge can sign off within 48 hours. That's before her birthday, Petra said. That's the idea. A silence. Mom. Petra's voice had something in it, not quite doubt, not quite horror. Something between them. What if she's not going to wake up? Miriam said it the way she used to say. It's not going to rain when we were children, and she didn't want to cancel a picnic. Certain. Final. Wishing a thing into being true. The neurologist was very clear. Minimal brain activity. She's already gone, Petra. We're just making it official. She's already gone. I clenched my right hand under the sheet. A tiny movement, barely a movement at all. A rebellion the size of a sparrow. 48 hours. I had 48 hours. Her name was Joyce Odemba. She was a night shift CNA certified nursing assistant, not even a full nurse, 26 years old, studying for her RN exam on her breaks. She had worked at Millhaven Regional for 3 years, and she talked to every patient she attended, conscious or not, because her grandmother had told her once that hearing is the last sense to go and the first one to stay. She came in at 11:15 on my third night. I heard her before I sensed her. Rubber-soled shoes, a soft, specific squeak on the left foot only where the sole had started to separate, and a very faint smell of shea butter and something medicinal, the way skin smells when someone works with their hands all day. She took my vitals with quick, practiced efficiency. Then she paused at the foot of my bed. Serena, she said. Just my name, not a question. She adjusted the line on my IV, checked the ventilator readout. Read my chart aloud, quietly, the way some people read to themselves when they're really paying attention. Then she lifted my right hand to reposition the pulse ox monitor on my finger, and I moved. It wasn't intentional. Or maybe it was I had been practicing for 2 days in the dark hours between Miriam's visits, the silent hours between 2 and 5 in the morning when I tested every muscle I could find. Toes first, then ankles, then fingers. The movement was tiny. A curl of my index finger, the smallest possible closing, like reaching for something very far away. But Joyce felt it. Her hand went completely still. She didn't speak for a long moment. I heard her breathing change, not faster, just more deliberate. The breath of someone paying a different kind of attention. Serena. Her voice was barely above a whisper. If you can hear me, do that again. I did it again. Slower this time. Controlled. Her exhale was long and quiet. Then she said in the most careful voice I have ever heard. Okay. Okay, sweetheart. I hear you. She didn't call anyone. She didn't rush out. She set my hand back down with the same gentle precision and stood there for a moment in the dark, and I heard the small scratch of a pen on paper she was writing in a personal notebook she kept in her scrub pocket. I learned later, not the hospital chart. A habit she'd developed from a professor who told her, write what you see, not just what you're supposed to see. You hang in there, Joyce said. And then the left shoe squeaked softly down the hall and she was gone. She came back the next night with a plan. Night 4. She closed the door completely, latch and all. I'm going to ask you yes or no questions, she said, her voice just above a breath. Squeeze once for yes, twice for no. Can you do that? 1 squeeze. Good. Are you in pain right now? 1 squeeze. Can you open your eyes? 2 squeezes. Is there someone you want me to contact? Someone who doesn't know you're here? 1 squeeze. Hard. The hardest I could manage. Your husband, Daniel. 1 squeeze. She was quiet for a moment. Then, the woman listed as your healthcare proxy, your aunt. She told the hospital your husband is traveling for work, that he's been notified, that he agrees with the current care plan. 1 squeeze. Then 2. Fast. Yes, I know. No, that's not true. I felt Joyce exhale, slow and controlled. I've been doing this 3 years, she said quietly. I've seen a lot of families in these rooms. Most of them are scared and sad and doing their best. But some of them, she paused. Something about your aunt doesn't sit right with me. The way she talks about the timeline, the urgency. It's not grief, it's something else. She placed her finger in my palm. I'm going to find your husband. Your intake form from your last visit, a broken wrist, 2 years ago, should have an emergency contact number. I'll call from my personal phone on my lunch break tomorrow. But you need to do something for me. She leaned close. Don't let anyone know you're conscious. Not the day nurses, not the doctors, nobody who might mention it to your aunt before I can get Daniel here. Can you do that? 1 squeeze. Good, she said. Stay still. Stay quiet. I'll find him. She patted my hand once. The left shoe squeaked down the hall. For the first time in 4 days, I felt something other than terror. I felt like the locked room had a key. I want to tell you about Daniel and me. We met at a hardware store, which is either very romantic or very boring depending on how you feel about hardware stores. I was buying wood stain for a bookshelf I was attempting to build. He was buying the same wood stain. He looked at my cart and said, "That's a good choice, but you'll need a preconditioner first or it'll blotch." And I said, "I know," which was a complete lie. And he knew it was a lie, and he walked me to the preconditioner anyway. We got coffee after. We got married 3 years later. Daniel is not a dramatic person. He doesn't make speeches. He doesn't send elaborate gifts. What he does is show up quietly, reliably, with exactly the right amount of presence. When my father was dying, he drove me to the hospital every morning for 6 weeks and sat in the waiting room reading paperback westerns without ever once asking when this would be over. When I cried at things on television, he handed me the throw blanket without comment. When I had bad dreams, he put his hand on my back and kept it there until I stopped shaking. Miriam had called him the night I was admitted. She'd told him I was stable and sedated, that the doctors recommended limited contact to reduce stimulation, that she was handling everything. She had counted on Daniel being the kind of man who respects medical authority. She was right about that, but she had miscalculated one thing. Daniel called the hospital's main line every single day. And every day, the main line told him I was stable and resting, and that my healthcare proxy had restricted calls to my room. He didn't push. He didn't know he needed to. He trusted the word stable. He trusted Miriam. He was home, 45 minutes away, eating gas station sandwiches for dinner and staring at his phone and waiting for news. Joyce called him on a Tuesday, from the hospital parking lot, on her lunch break. She told me later the call lasted 6 minutes. That his voice, when she told him I had been in the ICU for 4 days, went completely silent for a long moment. And then very quiet and very steady, the way things get right before they break. What do you mean 4 days? She told him everything. The healthcare directive, Miriam's urgency, the court order Miriam was filing, the 48-hour deadline. She told him to come to the east entrance after 10 p.m., when the floor was quiet. She told him I could hear him. He said, "I'm already in the car." He was at the stairwell by 9:40. Joyce brought him in. I heard 2 sets of footsteps, her squeak, and then something heavier, the work boots Daniel wore every day, a sound I knew so well it was practically a word. He crossed the room and I felt the mattress shift as he came close. I could smell him sawdust and the cedar soap he used, and underneath that just him, the smell that isn't anything you can name except the person it belongs to. He knelt beside the bed. I felt his hand close around mine. Both hands. Actually, he held my hand in both of his. The way you hold something you're afraid of losing again. "Hey," he said, his voice cracked straight down the middle. "Hey, Serena, I'm here. I'm so sorry. I'm here." I squeezed. He made a sound, not crying exactly, The sound you make when you're trying not to cry in front of people and not quite succeeding. I felt the mattress take his weight as he leaned his forehead down against our joined hands. Joyce gave him a minute. Then she pulled her notebook from her pocket and began. She read him 4 days of time-stamped observations. Every time Miriam had arrived and left. Every conversation she'd heard through a cracked door. The folder, always that folder, with the clasp and what Miriam had said about the trust, and the court order, and the deadline. She read it all in her quiet, precise voice, and I felt Daniel's hands tighten around mine with each page. When she finished, the room was still. "What do we do?" Daniel said. "You need 2 phone calls," Joyce said. "Tonight. An estate attorney, whoever drafted that trust. And the police." Daniel called my father's attorney from the hospital parking lot at 11 p.m. Gerald Marsh, 70 years old, semi-retired, answered on the 3rd ring. Daniel told him everything. Marsh confirmed the trust. $3.8 million, distributing automatically on my 31st birthday 9 days away. Reversion clause. If I died before distribution, the full amount went to the estate. Miriam, as sole beneficiary of the estate under my father's will, would receive everything. "But here's what Miriam doesn't know," Marsh said. "Your father added a clause, it's called a slayer provision. If any beneficiary is found to have caused or contributed to the grantor's or primary beneficiary's death, they are disqualified from receiving any benefit, even if she gets that court order. Even if Serena dies before the birthday. If Miriam is found to have tampered with that car or forged that document, she gets nothing." "Forged what document?" Daniel said. Marsh told him to pull the copy of the healthcare directive that the hospital had on file and compare it against the original, the one filed with my father's estate attorney 8 years ago. The detective who responded to Daniel's call that night, a woman named Rhonda Tate, former county prosecutor, methodical and unhurried, had the forensic comparison done by morning. The document Miriam had given the hospital was 4 pages. The original on file with Marsh was 3. Page 4. The page that authorized withdrawal of life-sustaining treatment had been added. My signature at the bottom was a digital copy, lifted from the original and placed onto the forged page. Under magnification, the ink pressure was completely flat, in a way that a real pen signature never is. Miriam had forged my signature on a document that gave her legal authority to end my life. The car would come later. The mechanic she'd hired folded within 72 hours of questioning, gave a full statement, named a date and a payment method, and a very specific conversation in the parking lot of a gas station on Route 9. But that night, the forged page was enough. My 31st birthday. 7:15 in the morning. I heard Miriam's heels before anything else. That particular click on the linoleum, crisp and certain, the walk of a woman who believed she was arriving to collect something. She had the court order. I heard the papers in her hand, a light, papery rustle, and she was speaking to someone at the nurse's station. "I need to speak with the attending physician. I have documentation authorizing." The door to my room opened. Not Miriam. A voice I didn't recognize. Calm. Flat. "Miriam Calloway Petch?" "Yes. Who are?" "Detective Rhonda Tate, Millhaven County Sheriff's Department." "Miss Petra Okonkwo?" Yes. You're both under arrest. Attempted murder, conspiracy to commit murder, and fraud. I need you to put the papers down, please." The room went silent. Not the silence of a hospital, not the hum and beep and distant intercom. A real silence, the kind that falls when something enormous shifts. She's in a coma. You can't possibly. I opened my eyes. The light was extraordinary. White and flat and everywhere. And after 5 days of dark, it hit like stepping outside after a long winter. I blinked. The room blurred, then clarified monitors. IV stand. The window with morning light pressing through curtains the color of old cream. And Miriam, standing at the foot of my bed with the court order in one hand and her cedar rose perfume filling the room, her mouth open, her face doing something complicated and terrible. I looked at her. I didn't speak. I had been silent for 5 days. Everything I had left to say to her had already been said in the dark, in the hours when I'd practiced clenching my fist and waiting. I let my eyes do the rest. She looked away first. Behind her, 2 officers moved forward. One of them began reading rights. Petra sat down very suddenly in the vinyl chair and put her hands over her face. Daniel appeared in the doorway, Same work boots he'd had on 2 nights ago. Same jacket. He looked like a man who had not slept and did not care. Joyce was beside him off shift, still in yesterday's scrubs with her notebook tucked under one arm. Daniel crossed the room and took my hand. "Happy birthday," he said. His voice was wrecked. "Beautiful." Gerald Marsh came at 10 with a leather briefcase and a birthday card he'd clearly bought at the hospital gift shop, a generic one with balloons, which I found perfect. He sat down across from my bed, opened the briefcase with 2 precise clicks, and laid a folder on the rolling table. "As of 12:01 this morning," he said, "the Robert Calloway Irrevocable Trust has fully distributed to its sole beneficiary, Serena Calloway Briggs." He adjusted his glasses. $3.8 million. Yours. No conditions, no contingencies. The Slayer provision disqualifies Miriam from any claim regardless of the criminal outcome, though the criminal outcome is expected to be significant. He looked up. "Your father thought very carefully about this," he said. I stared at the ceiling for a moment. Then I said first words in 5 days, voice like gravel, like rust, he always did. Joyce was still in the doorway. She had her notebook in her hands, turning it over the way you turn over something you're deciding what to do with. I looked at her. "You," I said. "Both of you." I looked at Daniel. "Thank you." Joyce nodded, tucked the notebook back in her pocket. Then she said, "For the record, your brain activity was never as flat as they claimed," and walked out. The left shoe squeaked twice on the linoleum. Then the sound faded down the hall and she was gone, off to sleep, off to study for her RN exam, off to the next patient in the next room who might need someone to notice something small. The recovery took 3 months, 2 surgeries on my left leg, 6 weeks of physical therapy in a clinic that smelled like rubber mats and optimism. My voice came back in stages, a whisper first, then something hoarser, then finally something that sounded like mine. Miriam's trial was 18 months later, the mechanic testified. Gerald Marsh testified about the forged document. Joyce testified about everything she'd written in that notebook. Miriam was convicted on all counts. Petra took a plea, cooperated fully, 3 to 4 years, minimum security. She sent me a letter from county detention, 7 pages long, handwritten in her careful, rounded printing. I read it. I'm still deciding what to do with it. The lake house sold. The proceeds went to the trust. The hardware store where Daniel and I met is still there. He still stops in on Saturdays, even though we have accounts at the regional supplier and there's no practical reason. Some habits are worth keeping. I went back to teaching in the fall, 3rd grade. Spelling tests and science projects and 8-year-olds who believe, absolutely and without question, that you can do anything if you just try harder. On the worst days of recovery, I thought about them constantly. The morning I was discharged, Daniel brought Biscuit to the hospital parking lot. Not inside, the rules were clear about that. But he sat on the hood of his truck with the cat in his lap, and when I walked out through the sliding doors, still stiff, still slow, still surprised every single time I could move my own legs, that was what I saw. My husband. My ridiculous fat cat. Ordinary daylight. On my kitchen windowsill, when I got home, there was a new plant. Not the one I'd had before, that one hadn't survived my absence. This was a small rosemary plant in a terracotta pot, label still on, a little crooked in its soil. Daniel had bought it the week I was discharged, while I was still in rehab, because he'd read somewhere that rosemary was for remembrance, and he'd thought that sounded right, somehow. I stood in the kitchen and looked at it for a long time. Then I put my hand against the pot. The terracotta was warm from the morning sun, and I thought about all the things I had not been able to say for 5 days. All the words that had piled up behind a body that wouldn't move. And I thought, I'm still here. Some roots hold, even when everything tries to pull them up. Some roots hold. That's Serena's story. 5 days of silence, 1 notebook, 1 squeaky shoe, and a birthday that arrived exactly when it needed to. If this story made you think about checking your own healthcare directive, or updating your emergency contacts, or maybe calling the person you've been meaning to call, do it. Today, not tomorrow. And if you know someone who needs to hear this, share this video with them. Thank you for being here. Drop a comment below, hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.